What? Grassy Knoll, and we have Andy Colvin with us. He was on last month. We did a live show. He had 90 minutes of that show, and that was recorded on March 28th. It is now in the audio archives and also configured for iTunes. At any rate, he's back with us. And Andy, if you don't mind, let's pick up where we kind of left off. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yeah.
All right. I'm just seeing some dropouts on the screen here, so I was concerned whether or not you could, and you tell me you can't hear me, so we're off and running. And I'm going to throw it over to you. Where do you want to pick it up?
Well, just before I started, while you were running the intro, my screensaver popped on and showed the image of the monster of Ravenna. Which is, have you heard of that? This is an image. Well, it's just an image that I grabbed from the web of this monster that was found, and I don't have the info in front of me. I just had that picture. It just looked by, but I think it was the 1600s, and it had wings. It was like a human being that was born with wings, or some kind of appendages that kind of had a malformed wing thing going on. And in the depiction of it, I noticed that they had drawn a crescent moon upside down with, it's a drawing, so with a triangle over it pointing down into the crescent.
Well, that's got all the occult basic food groups.
Yeah. And it's on his left breast. And then I noticed, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I found a similar configuration on the Bohemian Grove statue, the owl statue that they worship, the Booties and all those folks.
Yep.
And I don't know if that's still there or not, but because that was an old photo that I saw from like the 1890s.
You know what's so funny? I mean, no, it's ironic, and I won't dwell.
Moorish influence, Egyptian influence.
Yeah, and it also goes back to, well, it's interesting. It seems that Egyptian sun god worship obviously looked like Saharan in its locale, if you will. Also, it's very interesting, too, I think. I don't know if we ever talked about that. Yeah, we did. The fact that when John Surratt fled the United States because he was implicated in the plot to kill Lincoln, he goes into the Vatican Guard, and then he's supposed to be given back to the United States, and there's an escape arranged for him. And then he winds up going to all places, Alexandria, where eventually he was caught a final time and brought back. I don't know, just a little hook in there. But another thing I want to ask you, too, what you were describing to me about the monster of Ravenna, is that something that we've come to know kind of as that depiction of Nosferatu? Do you know what I mean? There's an image of a shaven thing's head with kind of pointy ears and these wings that look kind of veinous, if you will. Is that what we're looking at with that kind of monster depiction?
It's kind of it's reminiscent of it. It's creepy like that, definitely.
Yeah, and that's the creepiest of all the stuff I see. And I just want to share this with you real quick. my wife and I go riding around on our bicycles in this neighborhood, which is, looks like it's something out of Edward Scissorhands. Everything is like beige. The whole place is beige. And, you figure there's also a lot of nondescript people here as well. But two things struck us as we rode around. We go by this one house, and in the garage, standing near the opening of the door, just inside the tracks, that the door, runners come down on, is that kind of thing. I mean, here's this pointy nose, eyebrow kind of slanted down, spot kind of like, pointy ears and that whole thing. And I'm looking at it, and it's red. And I'm looking at this, and I go, I look at my wife and go, well, what's with this? She goes, well, it's probably a Halloween prop. I'm going, I'm sure it is, but like, holy mackerel. I mean, couldn't you find something a little softer than that? And why in the world do you keep it in full view? Every time you open up the garage door, what is that? It's supposedly scare away what? I'm not sure. But here's it. Now, you tell me. Maybe I'm nuts. And that's all right. But then we passed by another house. These people had just moved in. Young couple. They bought a model, one of the models, that they converted into actually a domicile. They don't have just one, not two, not three, but they have 4 jet black winged gargoyles. 2 that are big, 2 that are smaller. They have one at the edge of the garage in the end of the driveway apron. They have one in the middle between the 2-car garage. They have another one near the walk and another big one right near the door. Now, excuse me, am I missing something here? Why in the heck would you, just put on display these 4, like I said, jet black gargoyles? I mean, is this something that came out of better house, Southern homes or better? But you know what I mean? It's like of all things, man. What are you thinking about? Now, I mean, do you see maybe you don't have any problem with that. Would you just tell me?
Well, what do you think they're doing? Do you think that are they drawing in energies or something? What are they trying to do?
I have no idea. But of all the things that would say, welcome to our home sweet home or something like that, these 4 winged gargoyles, I mean, mouth agape, sharp teeth, ugly as a pair of, bookworms, and I just have no idea. Why in the world would you put that out? Other people put out like little funky things, but to do that, I can't figure out what's in somebody's mind that they would think that actually is like looking really attractive. I don't know. Maybe I should ask them.
Well, this reminds me of a little note that I had in my note stack here.
How did I know that?
You seem to have a knack for that. And last time I was in Albuquerque, I noticed a house that had, I was visiting a fire department person, and across the street somebody had a gargoyle. It was Christmas time, they had a Santa hat on the gargoyle. And then I read recently that an Albuquerque fire chief, his daughter had a 911 premonition, and somehow that got in the news. And that made me think of, somehow I tied it in with Sandia, because Sandia is in Albuquerque, that's that corporation, and that my father-in-law worked out for many years. He worked with lasers and things, and that brings up the specter of the whole laser. I think there's got to be some connections with Sandia and carbide in all this, just because the Rockefellers are so big in New Mexico and West Virginia, and really key in on the defense contractors for control. But Sandia, interestingly, did mining cave-in research. And remember how you and I were joking about we weren't joking about them, but talking about the different mine disasters and how they seem to be timed to, have a certain effect.
Yep.
And so here you have this company which has a Thunderbird as their logo, and their supercomputer is called the Thunderbird. And they're definitely involved in nuclear stuff, which is really the province of the Rockefellers. The energy department and carbide and all that. And their interest in satellite laser stuff ties them really into, closely in all this too, I think. But they're sort of like a West Coast extension of carbide, in my mind. That's what it reminded me of. And on that same page, I might as well finish out that one page. I had a couple of other things highlighted. The name of that RCA device that they were using at Montauk the number was FRR24, some kind of special vacuum tube thing they use to generate these unusual electromagnetic states that somehow can get you into some time travel situations. Another note about Montauk was that they found hundreds of skeletons there, which is similar to the skeletons that were found in Point Pleasant in the mid-'70s. And it was also a man-beast scene at Montauk, which I don't know if I ever really talked about. They had a Mothman-like thing, more like a Bigfoot-like thing, that supposedly got loose and ravaged the buildings. And that's why they had to, I mean, who knows if it's true or not, or if sometimes they throw this stuff in to throw people off, like Paranoia magazine, which I talked about last time. They have some articles this month. There was an article about paranoia in the Washington Post just last month. So now all the DC folks are going to be reading it. And but they summed up one of the things that they used to make fun of paranoia was David Icke talking about how the Rockefellers were reptilian shapeshifters. So I think, I kind of smelled Icke as being an agent early on.
Yeah.
But this is what they do. They'll, and the fact that they focus on the Rockefeller in that article, the Rockefellers in that article, is interesting because they want to make sure that everybody gets the message. And anytime you hear something about the Rockefellers, it's going to have to be blown out of proportion.
Yep. Well, I mean,
and it really proves. I mean, the cover-up always proves the crime, right? So if they're going to spend all their time convincing us that anything about the Rockefellers is bunk, it just really shows that there's more to it than you think.
Well, is this what we're talking about? If I got it right, where you're going with this, and that's what we said about like the X-Files in particular, and there's other things like National Treasury with as far as films go. But with the X-Files, they'll tell you the truth, and then they'll tie it into something ludicrous, and then everybody goes off to show this whole thing is stupid, and they walk away. I mean, am I right that they do this deliberately?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And listen, I just want to say something to you, and let me do it now while I can think about it, because I kind of got the willies. When you sent something around, and I never could understand this, but I never did ask why. I mean, I come from the TV days when, I was more inclined to get up very earlier than my parents, and the bummer was if you get up too early in the old days of TV, you dealt with test patterns. And one of them I remember with the Indian head. You remember? Did you send something around like that in an email?
Yeah.
I think you did.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I never asked what's with the Indian head, and then again you look at another configuration which looks like the very ancient cross that we've known as a couple of things, the Maltese cross, the Templar cross, the Ku Klux Klan cross, the German Iron Cross. But you stated that was what was found in some garbage can in Harrison, New Jersey. What was it that was found?
Well, they found the original drawing of the Indian test pattern.
And it was dumped out of what, RCA?
Yeah, RCA built all the early TV equipment too.
Well, I hung out in Harrison in the early 70s, and I was aware of Western Electric and Otis Elevator and Hector Bread. But I don't really know that I remember RCA being there. And I'm not saying it wasn't. It's just that it's very interesting because when you said Harrison, I mean, I flashed on like the whole town and like, the streets I had haunted. Because my boss in college when I was working in the athletic department when I was going to school used to have us down like once a year for like this big Polish spread, and it was great because at that time Harrison was a very ethnic Polish place. And I do remember, in fact, Western Electric you could see from the New Jersey Turnpike. And it was very prominent. I mean, when I was going to Jersey City State, I passed it like every day. So when you said that, it's like, holy mackerel, isn't that interesting that it would have come all from there,
Well, they're basically the same company.
They are, aren't they?
RCA and Western Electric, and that's where Harriet's dad worked, Western Electric.
But out of where? West Virginia?
Well, who knows? But yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any Western Electric offices in West Virginia other than just some nondescript, thing in a building somewhere that nobody knows about. It's probably how it is. But that reminds me, that guy I mentioned last time, William Dean Ross, who talked about the equals wheel, NASA,
right,
upcoming thing, hologram they're going to do. His wife was working in a building in downtown Charleston, and there's a lot of things in his article, Catch a Falling Star, which people should check out on the web that are really interesting. He's saying that his wife was being attacked with ELM radiation while she was at work in this building in downtown. That he's claiming that they were pointing these devices around at people right there, and when he names a name, he said he thinks it was coming from the Federal Building because her window faced the Federal Building. In the next paragraph, he talked about the book Kundalini Tales by Richard Sauder, who wrote the Underground Bases book. Really good book, by the way. You get to see these. They really have these huge underground tunneling machines. He says on page 16 of Kundalini Tales, they have a picture of the guy that Ross worked with at West Virginia State College, a NASA dude, Dr. John Sutton. And I guess he said he's on the right of the picture. That was Ross's boss on this project in and around the Institute, where they were trying to study vortexes. He mentions, he says he was worked with psychics talking to UFOs, this Dr. Sutton, and with a Dr. Spaniel, Spaniol, and he claims that they're Masons, and that they have a big influence in NASA, and that they're Luciferians.
Okay, that sounds like a good piece.
The white van was doing they also had a mobile white van that was pointing these devices at people, and that they pointed it at him on occasion, and he came out and caught them. And he claims there's some link to a group in Mount Shasta, Barb Max Hubbard. Heard that name before.
Oh yeah.
Is that a man or a woman? Is that a woman?
There's a Barbara Hubbard. Somebody sent us an email. I say us.
Anyway, he connects it to Aquino. He says that group, the U.S. Army 1st Earth Battalion, whatever that is connected to the Church of Set, run by Aquino, who we talked about.
Yeah, whenever he ever finished his book, he had it in part on his website. I never went back, and it's not something I really want to delve into, but and there's something going on with Shasta, too. There's something happening out there also with the activity you have out there, or it's reported to be out there anyway. Can I just throw something in real quick? I didn't talk to you about this. I had talked about it previously with somebody from North Bergen, New Jersey, who had some UFO sightings. And I had one sighting in Jersey as well, that my wife was present for as well. We both of us saw this thing. But, there's another thing, too. Chris Knowles, I think you might remember Chris, but he does some interesting stuff, and he lives in Jersey also. He said, this state's weirder than you know. And we've never really touched upon that, maybe for another time. Talking about stuff that went on down along the boardwalk and stuff, Asbury Park, Belmore and stuff. But, I came across some, really strange stuff back when I was hiking in there, and I wasn't thinking too much about anything. I really wasn't inquisitive, but I just thought it was kind of strange that this place should be plopped in the middle of the woods up in northeast New Jersey. But something else happened, too, and Matthew Tartaglia said this to me, who was the EMT worker out of southeast Pennsylvania who went to Ground Zero, got quite sick, and is happily, I can see he's on the mend. But he was talking about underground tunnels in the northeast. And I thought this was interesting because obviously there are, Andy, did you, I mean, when you were growing up or when you were in high school or whatever, there's got to be some kind of bullet train underground device from D.C. out to Mount Union or Mount Weather or whatever it is. Do you know for a fact that that's the case, or was there ever any talk in West Virginia that they had bored, what would you call like rapid rail, to get folks the heck out of D.C. should the big one hit the fan?
Well, that would probably be more Virginia. If you lived in Virginia, you may have heard of it. But in general, in West Virginia, the people that are there know less about all this stuff. It's amazing.
Okay, but we always said, too, that it made sense for him to go to West Virginia because I could get on the other side of the Blue Ridge, which I think would be smart. I don't know if we had said that, but I mean, Well, anyway, the thing is, we know what's going on out in Denver. And, obviously there's a New York Times story in the mid-'90s that talked about why are the Russians doing this, and even Orwell alluded to it. So it's not, it's not urban legend, but, the thing is, Matthew said something to me that flipped me out. He goes, well, there's some portal to these tunnels that are in the Northeast. He goes, at 130 Midland Avenue, Paramus, New Jersey. And I know that building very, very well. I've never been inside it, but it's the only building on this little short block that leads to Route 17. It's an on-ramp, and across the way is a little secondary, what would you call it, I guess, outpost for Bergen County Sheriff's Department. And I remember the thing, it's got like, smoky black glass. The whole building is black, so there you go. But there was some kind of access to it. And then I started thinking, like, where does this all go to? And then I think about Iron Mountain. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When you sent me that, and I didn't think it was the same one, and of course it is, and how subterranean that is. So, I mean, I know I'm taking this off on a digression, but this stuff is too good not to mention, at least to you. I didn't get a chance to do this before. As to what in the world are we looking at? I mean, is it a honeycomb situation only in certain regions? Or are there a lot of things tied in, like coast to coast beneath us, and we don't even know about it? You got anything? I mean, not that you have to, but I mean, do you have anything you want to kick in about that?
No, I just people should just check out Richard Sauder's Sauder, his stuff, and I just, I think it's sad. I wouldn't even want to be in one of those, but I think it makes sense, and if this culture gets destroyed every so often,
right,
as we advance and decline, it makes sense, and that's why the old legends say we came out of the earth. Most of them do. We came out because we probably destroyed ourselves in a previous age, and then a few mutants managed to survive down there. And of course, that would dumb you down real good, and then you come out and you just sort of live a subsistence lifestyle, catching whatever is alive at the time, still alive.
But I think we can agree that a lot of what was going on today, I think it's in preparation for what we know will most likely, or I would even say definitely, lead to a Third World War. And some of these cats want to sit this thing out underneath, and I'm sure they're not going to be, bereft of any of the accoutrements and trappings of Home Sweet Home. I don't know, but
I mean, Tesla warned about this kind of stuff.
Did he?
Yeah, well, he was particularly concerned about setting the sky on fire. And this would tie right into biblical prophecies, some of the horrible things that you would undergo during the
tribulation,
last days, yeah. And it made me think of the Chicago fire, which I think it's possible that they could have started that fire. If you study it, if you check out Vincent Gaddis, the book by Vincent Gaddis, Gaddis. He talks about how it didn't really start in any place that they know of. It was a wave of heat that came through the sky and just set everything on fire. It was some sort of paranormal thing. But Tesla was around then, I think.
Well, I was just going to ask you, where is this juxtaposed in time to whatever took place out in Siberia?
Both of them could have been. I mean, Tesla was, shooting electricity through the atmosphere all the time. But when was Tunguska? Wasn't that earlier than Tesla? I don't know.
No, I don't think it was earlier than Tesla. In fact.
But HARP, this HARP facility is based on a Tesla design, and I think that, the more they try to screw around with things and putting contrails in the sky and then trying to charge them with particles and things, it could lead to what Tesla was talking about. The whole sky's on fire, and then you have some of the scenarios that people have been dreaming about. And Mothman witnesses and things have been having unusual dreams like that.
What about but I mean, aren't we talking too about weaponry like plasma?
What's that? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is reminding me of what, at least, I mean, I don't get deep in this stuff. Not that I don't think it's important, it's just not, my bailiwick or anything, but dealing with what plasma might do to a targeted area, as weaponry.
Yeah. Well, geez, horrible.
Well, yeah. But I mean, look what they did with just conventional means, if you will, in Dresden, when they dropped so much ordnance that the thing actually was a wildfire out of control. And they couldn't do anything to stop it except the thing had to burn itself out. I mean, that, I think, arguably was as bad, if not worse, than what took place in Japan. And not because it happened to Western Europeans, it's just that I think that gets overlooked as a very nasty, and I would say extremely mean-spirited attack, if you will, on by the Allies. And I find it interesting because apparently Dresden, and it was an artsy-craftsy place, full of bohemians who weren't behind the war, and I'm thinking, knowing that everybody knew what everything else was going on, that the Germans didn't want the Allies to do it to their own, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But that's conjecture, I understand, so.
A couple more notes on that page before I move on to another page. With MON, the Mon word, we have manta ray. A lot of people have described their Mothman visions or sightings as looks like a manta ray. That's a Mon word. And the manta ray has some sort of symbolic connection to the idea of vibration or ray. Why do they call it a ray? First of all, this particularly shaped animal is called a ray, which happens to be, the ray issue has come up before, and also the Mothman being the Garuda being the symbol of vibration, or being associated with vibration. And the other Mon one is the Indians that lived on speaking of the east side of the Appalachians you were talking about. The Indians that were there were called the Monacan Indians. That's a Mon word. Monacan. If you look on the old maps. Here's an item that I put in the article in Paranoia this month, Paranoia 47. It's a little thing that I read and just totally forgotten about, which was so close to what my family may have experienced, or what my dad may have experienced at least, is this that Gray Barker investigated, and this is in his book, MIB, The Unseen Terror, is that the name of it? Men in Black, where's that book? Terror Among Us. It's interesting that he has terror associated with Men in Black back in 1983 when he wrote that book. He investigated the case of a NASA employee. He was like a military guy, got drafted into working for NASA for a while. It was around this secret saucer that they had, the Avro saucer, which a lot of people heard about.
Oh, yeah.
And his name was Frederick, Jennings Frederick. He lived in Charleston, or outside Charleston. And there were a lot of NASA people living in Charleston. I don't know why, but...
Now, when you talk about Avro, too, are you talking about the Canadian craft?
Well, this is what I'm saying, is that this is West Virginia.
Yeah.
And, they make a lot of engines for space shuttles and things in Ohio and West Virginia. In fact, I just heard on the radio the other day that they were talking about the Airbus sale, or the recent contract that didn't go to Boeing but went to the Europeans instead.
Yeah.
And how that wasn't a big deal because the engines are still made in Ohio. General Electric makes the Airbus engines for the European planes. So we're being used as a slave state almost for some of these other European countries now.
Well,
I think that's been the plan all along.
Yes, you're exactly right. The other day I was thinking to myself that one day, one fine day, the means of production and manufacture will come back to the United States. Why? Because we have now been colonialized. Again, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And reduced to a working force that will obviously, it's going to be a very captive working force. And, yes, a good point, and that's exactly right. They're going to come back when everybody's making enough, and that's why this free trade thing is a riot. Because it's free trade for the corporations, but it's not going to be too free for the workers.
Yeah, and GE makes those engines in Cincinnati. And that's a Rockefeller company.
And do you remember, by the way, that very interesting Italian magazine? Well, it's not interesting Italian magazine, but the Italian magazine who had that very interesting articles about refrigerators made by GE, and one of them was showcased as the New York model. You remember that?
Yeah.
With the plane bearing down on the trade towers. Probably.
You'll have to apologize for that knocking. That's my son.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
The water's here.
As long as it isn't some kind of familiar spirit under the table, it's all right. So, not a problem. What I mean was it had, General Electric had an ad in that magazine, and one of the models of the refrigerators they had happened to be the New York model with a mural, like kind of looking from New Jersey, of this plane heading for the World Trade Towers. So did they know something, or is that just a coincidence?
Well, one of the guys that I interviewed in the Mothman 2 book, who was from Cincinnati, he just sent me a thing about the Pyramid Hill in Cincinnati, by the way. Check it out. It's and the guy who owns it is a wealthy mason named Wilkes. You had mentioned Wilkes before.
Yeah, that was.
But let me come back to that. He was telling me that, well, his dad worked at GE and was head of the medical department. And what was well, his dad was from Norway, I believe, or it was Norwegian. And they knew some of the folks involved with United Fruit and all that, the Bushes and all that. That's kind of how I got some of that info. But he sent this cool email about this place. It's called, if you go to pyramidhill.org, you'll find this pyramid park that this wealthy mason has built. And he's got an underground house there with the entrance as a pyramid that looks like the Louvre pyramid. And interestingly, one of the sculpture artists that are in the park is the guy that I studied with, and both of us studied with in art school, named Walter Dreisbach, Driesbach. And I guess Walter, my friend remembers Walter using Masonic acronyms in class a lot. And I once he started saying them, I remembered it was true that he would say, as above, so below, and he had this whole, he was very slick in his presentation, and Driesbach was.
Was this somebody who was an instructor or a classmate?
Well, the buddy was, and we were in class together.
Okay.
And our teacher was Walter Dreisbach, who was at that time in his late 60s, and he married one of the students, which we thought was unusual. A really beautiful woman from Spain. And we were all like, what's going on? And I guess Driesbach's still around. I mean, he must be like 100 years old.
Well, that'd teach you, marry a younger woman. That'll keep you going. But I mean, this Pyramid Hill, was this something that really was a true geographic?
Well, didn't you just, oh no, somebody else sent me an email about that whole area was covered with mounds. I mean, Norwood is a part of Cincinnati that had a lot of mounts, and that's where I bought my one of my Mothman outfits that I wore when I was kind of doing this performance art thing. And the Loveland Frogmen were famous Cincinnati. There's just a lot of famous entity sightings and a lot of old Masonic lore there and a lot of mound lore, and it's a really interesting place. And Mount Adams there, where we went to school, is supposed to be like the center of the Masonic world. It has all these underground tunnels and wealthy Masons lived there for a long time, and they planned to Civil War from there, and there's tons of these wealthy dudes. Indian Hill is where a lot of them live, and that was all Indian mounds that they mowed down. And
you're talking about Cincinnati, right?
Yeah.
We got a couple listeners from there who I hope I hear from with regard to this, because they've said some things to me too, because I think also that Cincinnati was a hotbed also for the Knights of the Golden Circle, who perhaps morphed into the Ku Klux Klan later on. And they were instrumental in fomenting and instigating, shall we say, a certain kind of warlike attitude in the Southerners to kind of get them prepared for what would be the Civil War some decade or two later. And I always wonder why they called Cincinnati the Queen City. Like, what's with that? So, again, because the Knights of the Golden Circle apparently comes out of England. So, you know what I mean? There you go.
Well, yeah. Well, Columbus was just named the most fastest growing tech city in the country just last week.
Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because my old partner Harry had to make some trips out there, probably in the 80s and early 90s. I think perhaps on behalf of General Dynamics or Paradigm. I'm not sure yet. I would not have. That would have sounded very strange to me if it weren't for Harry telling me, some time ago that he had to go out there.
Well, they blamed it all. I mean, they're blaming it on on Battelle. Battelle's got all these contracts now which we've talked about previously here. To figure out ways to spy on us and everything else.
Understand too. Something interesting also is OCLC. Does that acronym mean anything to you?
Yeah, we talked about that one.
Okay, all right.
We talked about that one.
Yeah, and that's where it came out in Columbus. That's right.
But I wanted to finish up on that last point about Jennings Frederick, the Avro or NASA employee working around the Avro saucer who lived in West Virginia. His family was. A SWAT team came in and injected them. They gassed them all and then injected them with truth serum of some kind. And he happens to remember this happening. And Barker got it all down or investigated it, mentioned it in that book. And that's, and they were asking him about UFOs, the concept of time and the future and things like that, which really reminded me of this dream or whatever it is that I have of our family being interrogated. I don't know if it really happened or not, but both me and my sister have had dreams about it, and we think it did probably happen. And then this would explain why my dad felt like he got jabbed with a needle in the middle of the night, because it seems like now we have a clear case, investigated by somebody else, that they were actually doing this. They were just going around, breaking in, putting families under drug and seeing what they knew, finding out what they knew.
And I don't mean to trivialize this, and don't think that I'm doing that, but when you say that bears some kind of similarity to the whole storyline about Fox Mulder and his sister. I mean, we have an abduction in that, I realize it, but you know what I mean? It's like it's them knowing something. Wasn't really sure when you're young, like what in the world was going on there, but something happened.
Yeah, I think there's clearly, there's some of it can happen with natural sort of hypnosis by, natural means, but a lot of this has been co-opted and they're using it, and it's a great cover. They can do stuff and then they can blame it on the aliens. Here's a new page of notes. West Virginia, there's a Jesuit university in Wheeling, West Virginia. It's now doing training for prison guards to be able to quell large-scale riots. So we have the Jesuits being involved directly in
lending their
stuff that you would never think that they should be involved in. They've decided to train people on that instead of training people in spiritual matters.
Now, let me ask you something. Well, that's the deal, though. I mean, they are not a spiritual order.
Right.
That's what they're supposed to be perceived as, and you know that. I mean, that's why they call, and they just named a new one, the head man, Jesuit general. Do you remember if that was in conjunction with that infamous prison in Moundsville? Are they using that kind of like as a base or something like that? You know? Do you remember?
No.
Remember that nasty? Have you ever seen that? And there you go, Moundsville, and what's also there is what? It's like a pyramid, isn't it, in a sense? The mound?
Oh, I don't know.
It looks kind of pointed at me.
I don't know.
But Andy, let me ask you this though.
I'll tell you this. The East Coast Indians built their homes. They didn't use teepees. They didn't make teepees. Their homes look African.
Really?
This is the thing, is that I think that the Indians are, perhaps Moorish or from northern Africa, and they're called Indians, first of all. I mean, it could be the very name Indian means that they came from India.
That's another...
And maybe came through, and they would have had to have come through Egypt first.
Yep.
And this is the story of the Scots, of course, is that they were Indians who came through Egypt and then went to Scotland. Well, maybe they took off for Scotland and they also took off for America.
But isn't that the point, though, Andy? I mean, we did get a rationale for that in our vanilla history textbooks. But, you look at India, Asian India, and then, it's like, well, what's with the Indians here? And then that's because they came from the Indies. Yeah, but they didn't come from the Indies, we know. But remember something, too, and I don't know if you ever availed yourself of this or you heard or we talked about it, but in that book pages of the book I got sent from that Rosicrucian 68th Conclave, when that guy, Clyburn, who's Clymer, who's in a very landed and powerful Pennsylvania family, of which one was onto the Constitution, a signer onto that. The Rosicrucians we're talking about in that particular book, and this is 1913 or 1916, whatever, the point's clear. But the thing is, they talk about that Mexico must be brought back into the United States, and then the capstone can be set upon the truncated pyramid, for it will be complete, because Mexico was part of Egypt long ago. All right, I'll stop right there. But you see the point. I mean, and that is, we were talking about land bridges there, and if they're right, well, of course, everybody knows that something's going on with pyramids in the Yucatan, pyramids in, obviously in Egypt, and also, pyramids actually everywhere in America, around the world. Isn't that true? I mean, the whole Midwest is laced with them. And that's what I'm wondering what you're talking about, if that's part of it. They're not as majestic, if you will, and they seem to be earthen, but they also seem to have taken on this shape, and were they part of this network as well?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there were big ones in China. The biggest ones are in China. But to me, I mean, not only do these Indians' homes look like the African round huts, but they also look like mounds. They're like slightly oval, but basically round.
Yeah.
And they look like igloos, basically, but they're not. They're made with other things. And then their boats look like cigars. Their boats were not sharp, didn't have points. They were very much like the cigar-shaped UFOs that people see around there.
They were duggouts, yeah. And understand too that even here in the Southeast, the tent thing was only with the Plains Indians who were nomadic and had followed the buffalo or whatever. But down here, you're right. I mean, there is a circa, I think, 16th century Cree village that they've reconstructed in a county park, and you're absolutely right. That's what those edifices look like.
Moving on to the next note, perhaps?
Sure.
West Virginia is also allowing their highway cameras to be used for spying at any given time. Anytime you have any kind of alert called, they're going to use the highway cameras. Even though they have tight controls on other aspects of camera stuff, they're really let loose on the interstate cameras. And so they've even developed what was it? They had a weird, it's like a strange agency now in West Virginia called what was that? It was very 1984-ish. Like the military. It's like anyway, I shouldn't even have brought it up if I didn't have the name in front of me. But if you check out that story, this was a recent story. which I would have to look for to find. I'll find it when I go through the calendar eventually. That was like in the last month that story came out. West Virginia highway cameras. You'll probably find it.
Okay.
The drugs used in Jonestown it was told to Mae Brussel by somebody named Joe Holtzinger that the drugs for Jonestown came from Westchester County, New York. Now, who did they get delivered to? They would have been delivered to Larry Layton Jr., who was from Charleston, who was a doctor there. So you have a connection between, this county that has Iron Mountain and Pujaric and the Rockefellers to Jonestown and to West Virginia, indirectly to Layton.
But, but it begs the question. I mean, they may have been and they may still be, although I wasn't familiar in Westchester County, that there might have been a pharmaceutical lab that, that actually made the stuff, or if it, it wasn't a pharmaceutical lab at all or something else, because, you're right. I mean, a lot of Westchester County is extremely tony and a little bit not, all that well known about, although it is home to the Rockefellers, Martha Stewart.
You had the Son of Sam cult was from there, too.
Must have been from southern Westchester County.
Yeah.
And SUNY Purchase is there, too, anyway. But
yeah, he would drive, Son of Sam would drive north up to wherever, and I think he stayed on a farm there for a while, but and then Long Island had some connections out there to Son of Sam. What else do we have here?
Well, we might as well tell people that we're talking with Andy Colvin, and that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. He's been with us for quite some time. His website's andycolvin.com. He has, you have DVD, right, of Mothman photographer, right?
DVD?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's available, and also the book.
Yeah, the two books. Third one's coming out soon. Soundtrack. AndyColvin.com.
You got it.
Did I mention the Charlie Manson? I think we may have found out who his dad is.
Go ahead. No. Well, you might. Go ahead.
Well, I talked about it being Judge Jackson before, because Manson kept referring to being raised by the Nuremberg judge, and I thought it was Jackson, because Jackson, well, I don't know, because he had the connection to West Virginia with being a judge there. But the other judge in Nuremberg looks like Manson. He looks a lot like Manson, and his name's Francis Biddle. He was the Pennsylvania judge for Western Pennsylvania. Originally, he was territory when he was federal prosecutor. He was appointed by Roosevelt, Franklin D. And to Western Pennsylvania, some district,
right?
Federal
district, right?
Which included Western Pennsylvania, which is where Manson's grandparents lived.
Now, two things. Was Manson?
I guess the mother's grandparents.
Was Manson supposedly a Maddox?
Right. The Maddoxes lived in Western Pennsylvania. So if Manson's mom happened to run into Mr. Biddle there in Wheeling, there you go.
Are you saying that they linked?
Well, that's what explained why Manson looks so much like Biddle.
It's so ironic because Biddle is one of those Mayflower families, and the one Biddle that gained, I guess, some notoriety, what was it, in the 80s or the 90s, the Mayflower Madam, she was running a prostitution ring. She was a Biddle.
Here's Manson changed his middle name to Willis in '67. And that's close to Biddle. If you knew your name was really Biddle, and you just wanted to kind of allude to it, Willis isn't too far off.
Probably some people would say, yeah, it is far off.
Well, it's one of those anyway.
Okay. Objection overruled.
I won't.
You don't say that.
Go anywhere with that. But speaking of him, there was this odd connection to, do I want to go into this? John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas.
You want to go into that. Yes, you do.
Who knew Manson, who knew the Beach Boys. Well, Phillips was from this area of Cincinnati where they had all the mounds near Indian Hill, believe it or not.
I believe it.
And I know this because I knew another student who lived there who knew him. It was like lived around the corner, and I'd go visit, and John Phillips was around the corner. And there was, let's see, Manson gave a ring to Dean Martin's daughter. How does that connect? What was I getting here? What was I going for here? They lived in the old, Polanski. There's a connection to Polanski because John Phillips was Polanski was walking John Phillips's dog when the dog got loose, ran down to the old Barrymore mansion. This is when Polanski was living on Cielo Drive.
Okay.
And who was living in the Barrymore mansion then? It was the cult of the Process Church. The Process Church of the last judgment, which is connected to Manson. So there's this scene in various books you can read about it where Polanski almost got ripped apart by these dogs that were owned by the cult. And so one of the employees who was living there, or one of the process members who was living there, worked for Joey Bishop. Where was I going with this?
Doesn't matter, just go.
Sirhan. But Sirhan was linked to the process. That's where I'm getting to, is that Sirhan is linked to Manson.
Now, was that process church also involved some way, as I'm trying to think back, to the jet propulsion labs?
I don't know.
Well, I tell you what.
Well, the process is another one of these British cult things that came in, and this may have been the Brits' way of moving in to help destroy the peace movement, was to have the process church come in. And because they disappeared right after
the job was done.
Right after Manson was caught, they disappeared.
And not to trivialize this again, but I mean,
one of them worked in the Ambassador kitchen, the Ambassador Hotel kitchen,
where Kennedy
Sirhan visited the day before.
Well, isn't that where Kennedy got shot? Where Robert got shot?
Yeah. So they programmed Sirhan.
Okay.
That's possible. That's the possibility that.
Well, maybe they rented out some Tavistock people who Manchurian candidated Sirhan.
And where was Manson during this? Because he was loose then. He was out then. He could have been involved with Sirhan.
Oh yeah, this is before the whole tape thing in '69. We're looking now back at '68. And they were all out there. They were still on the ranch, and then there was all that other strange stuff with the Beach Boys, and then you had the death with Dennis. What's his face? Okay, Brian Wilson. Okay, Dennis Wilson died strangely. Now I'm even thinking, like, what the hell? What happened with Mama Cass? I know. I'm not. No. But the thing is, how many of these deaths were choking deaths, in bed deaths, like Hendrix and Mama Cass and stuff? And
Well, my point is that during the Mothman craze, Manson was loose.
Right.
That's my point, and that he could have been, nobody quite knows where he was, and there was a murder of his uncle in West Virginia then, that summer. So it's possible that he was back there. It's possible Sirhan was back there, even, because he went missing.
Look, I'm going to ask you your opinion, and you don't have to have one, Andy. I'm just going to throw it out to you. I don't know if it's plausible or not. But it looks like, Ted lived, I was a junior in high school when, of course, I was in sixth grade. I was in seventh grade when JFK was popped. And then that weekend I watched Ruby pop Oswald, which is like, my father and I looked at each other and going, was that theatrical? And then, I go to my junior year in high school, and then Martin Luther King is shot, and then you have, Robert Kennedy shot, and I mean, I don't even know as a kid how I dismissed all this stuff unless I was so oblivious and too much into chasing skirts and playing baseball. That's probably the case. But when you look at this stuff, I mean, I look back at it now and saying, boy, why didn't some kind of flag, get raised about what was going on here? And the thing I'm saying is that you look at a guy like James Earl Ray, and what was going on there? And then you look at Manson, and I'm starting to wonder if these guys somehow, some way, were used by the government and got double-crossed by the government. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And in fact, James Earl Ray's brother says that James was working for DISC, Defense Industrial Security Command, just like a lot of other people in the JFK, thing. I mean, that's one of the older theories and probably the most accurate.
I mean, because obviously they never really did implicate Manson in killing anybody. I mean, the fact that you can say go kill somebody doesn't put you, you're not up for murder one.
Well, he clearly wasn't a defense, policeman, but Oswald probably was, and James Earl Ray was, and the thing about Oswald is that his controller, who had a Moore name, George de Mohrenschildt, was friends. Let's see. Let me get this right. LBJ's personal secretary was Olga Femer, Fehmer, and her mother was very close to George de Mohrenschildt, Oswald's handler. So you have a way that LBJ could have been directly, kept in
harness,
been apprised of Oswald's movements. There was one more note on that page. Did I mention Sean Hannity's show Beyond Belief?
No.
He does this show on Fox, which is really designed to make the Catholic Church look good if you've ever watched it. Every Sunday he'll do something called Beyond Belief, and it's a paranormal thing. But he always, it's always there's always like, they'll have a pagan example of something paranormal, which he will poo-poo, and then they'll have the Catholic version that's, obviously the only and right way. And they talked about this one in a Monward town, Monopello, Italy, Manopello, where they have something called Veronica's Veil, which sounds like a knockoff on the Shroud of Turin. It's a Christ image on a veil where they supposedly draped it over his face.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just one of the other thing he talked about. Did I talk about the vial of blood last time? There's a vial of blood another thing he talked about was in Naples they have a vial of blood. No, that was somebody else that talked about it. It wasn't Hannity, but they have this vial of blood that if everyone looks at it, they bring it out once a year in Naples, and the people look at it. If it turns back to real blood again, fresh blood, everything's fine. If it doesn't, they have like an earthquake or some terrible thing happen. Have you heard of this?
No. Apparently, it must have turned to blood the last several times. But
yeah, well, it rarely doesn't, and then they always have an earthquake. Well, my theory about this, once I heard this, it kind of clicked. And I made some notes on this, but I don't really have them in front of me. But what was it? There's something about, I think, and Keel found that most UFO stuff happens when the magnetic field of the Earth is low, not high. Everyone would think, well, when the Earth's really active. No, it's the opposite. What does this mean? It means that when the Earth magnetism is low, according to Puharich now, when one is low, the other expands. So if the Earth magnetism goes down, your magnetism will expand out to reach it. So the psi plasma works that way. When there's a recession on one side, there's an increase on the other. So
let me also remind you, and also the folks, that earlier in the month, we had on Alexandra Chica Bruce, who I did not solicit this, sent me some information and some background on her books and such. And one of the things she talked about was that was it Our Lady of Lourdes?
Mm-hmm.
The young ladies who supposedly saw the vision and stuff like that. She said that was UFO.
Yeah.
But some Spanish Jesuit priest got on top of that and said, "Oh, no, that thing was, that was miraculous." So
yeah, you mentioned that last time.
All right, I'm sorry, but I just thought that was interesting because, well,
I'm here to remind you of all the ones you've told before.
Yeah, but you know what it's making it sound like? It's like, the poor guy's getting Alzheimer now, and Andy's helping him along. Because as Dan Quayle said,
I'm just a few years younger than you. Just a few.
Just a few, yeah, right, about like 10. But like I said, Dan Quayle said it best. The mind is a terrible thing to lose. What an idiot, anyway.
Well, anyway, when people don't see, my theory is that when the Earth energy is high and an earthquake is about to happen in Naples, it interferes with everybody's ability to make that vial turn back to real blood. their belief system can't operate as strongly because of the interference.
Huh.
So there you go. I think that's, I'm sticking with that one. I think that's
okay.
Going on, based on Puharic's research, certainly.
So what does that mean?
Time ago.
Do you have something generating energy to do this, to jam it, if you will, or what?
You mean the human being?
Well,
or what?
Well, I mean,
there's a quantum. I mean, you have to sort of forget about the fact that we have bodies and all that, and just sort of see it as a field of energy.
But I'm wondering also, I mean, talking about HAARP and things like that, if there isn't something going on where these magnetic fields are not naturally fluxing.
Yeah, I could see where they would flood the atmosphere with signals just to keep everybody from accessing their own innate intuition.
Okay.
For sure. I'm onto a new page of notes here. Should I try to get through it?
Sure.
Okay, the date of the Silver Bridge collapse was predicted by callers to John Keel. I never really knew that they had actually been predicting the date of it, but it happened to be the same date that the Saturn V rockets were started to be used in NASA.
Human boy, made of flesh and bone. He thinks his pals are human too, but every one of them's a clone. Headless humans donating organs. Human girl, mirror on the wall, looking her body over. Half is hers, the rest is borrowed. Headless humans donating organs. It's cheaper. It's reliable. Headless humans donating organs. Sass, Squatch, trots in the open field. Even though he's primal, he might need a transplant someday. Headless humans donating organs.